I'm Rob.
And I'm Bill, and you're listening to the Teach and Live Abroad podcast.
This episode is going to focus on the ABCs of preparing and running your English classroom. So see what I did there, Bill? ABCs of the English classroom.
Nice. Clever. So, very clever, Rob.
Not really.
So today we're going to cover 4 topics. How do you form a lesson plan? Why routine matters? How to develop classroom management? And the influence of your personality on your students.
So even if you've been teaching a while already or you're new to the craft, these basics of the classroom will apply to just about every teacher out there. And we hope in this episode you'll maybe pick up a few ideas. Welcome to the Teach and Live Abroad podcast, where we delve into, chat, and discuss all things teaching and living abroad.
And today's Teach and Live Abroad episode is sponsored by EITESLJobs.com. EITESLJobs.com, an online resource for posting teaching jobs, finding teachers, or finding a teaching job overseas. That's EITESLJobs.com.
And hey, Bill, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Rob. Thanks. How's everything?
I'm doing quite well. And we've got an episode today where we want to cover some topics about being in the classroom as a teacher that you might know or might not quite yet know, but you will encounter for sure. And these are things like lesson planning, developing a routine, classroom management tips, and how your personality and energy influences your students in motivation and attention.
That's great. Those are some good topics. They fit nicely in with the previous couple episodes that we've had, where we've talked about how to find a teaching job, how to organize your information, how to be prepared for teaching abroad. So that's a great next set of topics.
Right. So I feel our goal for this topic was just to give some introduction to people who might be getting ready to go into this, or maybe you've been teaching a little bit already and you're not quite sure about some of these aspects. Maybe you're having some issues in class or you need some new ideas. And I think some of these things we're going to talk about today, these topics, are very relevant for just about everyone.
Some quick thoughts on today's topics. So number one, creating a lesson plan is super important. That sets the tone for the class. It establishes a sense of routine or an effective routine for you. And it also guides the students. So you have something that the students can follow during the class rather than kind of feeling like you're teaching and the students are in the class with really no direction.
Yeah, and this word routine, which we'll go into more specifically, is really, really important. It's not only getting that plan together, but finding a routine within the routine, which I'll talk about later, which is almost every day doing the same thing or doing certain lessons the same way, and how this helps your students.
Another topic today is establishing or creating an effective classroom management strategy. And we'll get into more of that in the show, but that involves like better classroom control, which helps improve learning. It helps you with your activities, which can run really well if you have that classroom management strategy established.
Yeah, right, Bill. Class management, and we'll also see how things like a lesson plan and routine can affect your class management. Class management is not only something that's on its own out there, but everything is sort of interconnected. And finally, what we want to get into is your personality, the teacher personality, and the importance of that to effectively create a classroom culture, to help your students learn a bit better. Really simple things like having a smile on your face or having some energy when you start your class. It's from that simple to a little bit more, and we'll talk about more about that later.
Yeah, so let's dive right in to the first topic, setting up and creating a lesson plan.
Right. So, okay, well, how would you do that? How should a teacher approach forming a lesson plan? And, what is a lesson plan exactly?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as a new teacher, one way to start and one place to start is to look for a template. So there might be, if you're teaching like an ABCs class, you're teaching some activity, a song, or things like that. It's going to be really easy to find a template or some kind of a something that someone created online already for you. So I would go for that if you can. Once you've done that, or once you have kind of a structure for your lesson plan or lesson planning, the first thing is to set some clear goals. So every lesson, where do you want the students to be at the end of the lesson? In a broad sense, what are the students learning? And this is important at every level. And then within that, once you've got these goals defined and they're achievable, set out some objectives for the class. So each lesson, what are those really small bite-sized chunks of items, or the pieces that the students should be able to do and master in a lesson?
Yeah. So I think a big something that's confusing for a lot of teachers is the difference between a goal and an objective. And as you said, a goal is a broader sense of this particular lesson. Like, what do we want to achieve by the end? But the objective are some of the more details or specifics of perhaps, like, for example, teaching the language. Well, I want them to know how to pronounce each of the vocabulary words, for example, like that. Whereas a goal might be a bigger thing of like, okay, I want them to know the meaning of all the words. Okay, so the objectives are smaller and more detailed than the larger goal. And the goals also expand more through a whole unit, or even like a whole month or a whole semester.
Right, good points. And as you develop your lesson plan, look how your objectives in each lesson tie into that bigger picture. What is, like you said, what is that, the longer term set of goals? So over a chapter, over a semester, over a year, how do your objectives help you to meet those goals? And if you do this in advance for every lesson, you'll find that you have a much easier time helping your students achieve those goals.
Yeah, and you'll be less stressed as well. You'll be much less stressed when you have this plan, because you know what you're going for, what direction you're heading into.
Right. So those are some important parts about starting the lesson plan process. And remember, grab a template if you can, right?
Yeah, and I think all of those templates, like the ones I was looking at a few, like on Pinterest, for example, there's a lot. They're all pretty much the same. And goals and objectives are usually the first two that you have to fill out and think about.
Very important. So once you've organized that information, then it's time to figure out what kinds of materials you need. So a lot of schools have this material, but you might find some things online, some worksheets, things like that. So whether it's flashcards or computer files, you might have music or other props, these types of things. It's really important to get that organized ahead of time. So you're not in class thinking, oh, I need this or I need that, or you're going to run out, in the middle of the class and kind of disrupt the flow and disappear on the students. I
remember, Bill, like years ago when you were part of you had a big school, a couple schools, you and your team, you guys' materials were all prepared correctly, right? Like you had it down to every flashcard, every little tool that you had to use. Is that correct?
Oh, pretty much. Yeah. Every lesson had, we actually had cabinets that had activities sort of for different levels. So if you were teaching, ABCs and there was some phonics component or something, you could actually go to that drawer or location and pull out that information, those tools, kind of templates and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really helpful when your school provides all of that for you, but not every school might do that. And my schools, for example, we have mostly everything. Like if we have songs or computer files that you need to use, flashcards, whatever, it's all there for you. So you just need to organize it before class.
Yeah, and that's fantastic as a teacher. So At this point, we know what we want to achieve with a lesson. We've organized what the students should learn. We have our materials. So now we need to figure out exactly how we're going to execute this in the class. So how are you going to actually roll out or have the activity with the kids? And it might even have you might even organize your information like, okay, this is 15 minutes here, 10 minutes here. Each activity is very clearly laid out. And also, I think something that might be helpful for some teachers is to actually put something on the whiteboard or on the board in your class where you're actually, you're indicating, okay, this amount of time for this and this and this. And that helps even the kids follow along, right? So they
Right. Yeah.
understand where they are and what to do.
Yeah. This is kind of like an agenda for the day or a rundown for the day. And I see some teachers do this, some don't have to do it, but it is a good idea, especially if you're starting out, for yourself and also for your students. So they're very clear about what the workload is going to be like today and what they're going to be focusing on. Yeah. Putting that agenda up is really helpful.
Absolutely. And then at the end of the class or end of the lesson, you in your plan, you should have an idea of how you will evaluate your students. Somewhat of a formative evaluation. How so that you can judge how your students did, who understands the material and who does not. Those are really important, because if you run through a lesson and you have no idea, how to determine whether or not your students are learning, that's obviously really going to be difficult. So have that together.
Right. And that comes with experience, like formative evaluation, teachers having a sense of who's catching on to what we're doing and who's having trouble, who's struggling, who's falling behind, who's really doing really well and might need a little bit more challenge. And that comes with time. And let me add one more thing too, not only formatively evaluating the students, but also evaluating yourself as a teacher and saying, hey, did this particular lesson go well? Are these the right procedures that I'm doing? Am I meeting my objectives?
Yeah, and have some space on your lesson plan if it's in a book that you're carrying, or if you're using like a Evernote or something like that on a tablet. Have some space for you to make those notes, like before and after the lesson, things to think about before, things to think about after. Right, that evaluation is
like
important.
a bit of a diary, right, of how you've done every day. For sure.
Yeah. And that'll actually help you, because the first lesson is going to be tough. You don't know where the kids are, right? It's a new class. You're teaching a new lesson for the first time. But after the second and third lesson, you're going to have a sense of what do you need to review from the previous class. So what do you need, or from a previous lesson? So that'll help you with that reinforcement learning, where the kids are repeating, but you'll understand what's important to repeat and what's not as important. So you can gauge that and then either spend a little bit more time with something they need to know and less time, with things they've already mastered.
Yeah, it really is a process. It's a long-term process.
Yep. And is there a post? So in the final part of your lesson planning, have some sense of what's the wrap up. How do we conclude this activity? Is there some kind of follow up at the end? Is there going to be homework? Is there something that I ask the kids on the way out as class finishes that might be related to some of the lessons I've taught today? Those will be really helpful for reinforcing that, and also establishing a routine with the kids.
Yeah, which we're going to get into next. So let's review that. First of all, you can find a template to help you, and there are some that you can pay for. I don't think you need to pay for any of them, because really it's just kind of like what would you say, Builder? Like kind of a sheet that's squared off and has rows. It's like a spreadsheet almost, isn't it?
Yeah.
Template with a couple titles. So try to find one online that's free. Again, Pinterest, if you have a Pinterest account, has tons, and teachers upload them and they'll give you samples. And you're going to want to map out your goals, broader goals for the lesson, objectives, an outline of the materials that you're going to need, procedures, how you're going to evaluate the students during the lesson, and then you're going to wrap up the lesson. How you're going to wrap it up with a post activity or some homework, something like that. Really simple.
All right, let's move on to another important part of the teaching process, which would be establishing a routine. And how does that influence your teaching, in the classroom? How does it influence the learning of the kids?
Yeah, so routine, and I know some people might say, oh, routine, what do you mean? Just repeat everything the same every day? Well, in a sense, you are. And let me explain here, like what a routine is, and the routines within the routine, and then how actually it's super important as far as influencing your students' learning. The first thing is that when you're brand new to a class, it takes a few classes to develop a routine, right? There might be some trial and error there. Some things might work, some might not. But over time, you're going to hopefully develop something that is going to start to mimic from a pattern that's going to mimic from the last class. And this is important because it's going to help your students get a sense of the expectations of a class. Remember before we said you can put an agenda up on your whiteboard or on your tablet if you're online, so the students know where they're going to go for the entire class. Well, routine can also help them know those expectations. And what I mean is that when you're teaching a skill, or you're going to begin the class, you're going to end the class, for example, all these things, you're going to do them in the same manner. And this is so the students will feel comfortable in the class, and they're going to not worry about any sort of surprises that might happen with them. And I'll lay out a term here called affective filter. You can look this up, affective filter, AFFECTIVE filter. And what an affective filter is that students in class might have some stress, shyness, anxiousness, because they don't know what's coming in the class, especially if they're learning a new language and maybe they're not understanding a lot of what the teacher is saying because the teacher is speaking English and their English isn't quite that good. So some students might have an anxiety of being in the class. Well, when you start to develop a routine, that student is going to become familiar with how you're doing things in the class, and that anxiousness or that affective filter is going to be diminished. And let's give you a really quick example here is that you can start off your class by saying, look, we're going to do a little activity with the date. And what day is today? And okay, what's the weather like today? Okay, and you're going to put it up on the board. You have some cards you can put up. And every class, you're going to start off the same exact way with the date and with the weather. And over time, your students are going to feel really comfortable in knowing that, oh, teacher's going to start the class this way. And when they feel comfortable, they're going to be willing to maybe raise their hand and want to participate and not going to feel so nervous.
So yeah, Rob, that's something I noticed as a teacher, that oftentimes with a new class, if you are a little bit, if your actions are too fast or you speak too quickly or things like that, especially with young kids who don't speak the language. So their English is really, their skills are really like at a low level. They actually get scared and nervous. So you're creating that filter where it blocks their ability to learn.
Exactly.
And that's something, as a new teacher, slow down, smile, be warm and welcoming, and don't put up that barrier, because otherwise it's going to be really hard to get through those first kind of initial classes with a new group of students.
Yeah, and why does this happen? Well, first of all, I teach a lot of young children. They're going to be obviously very nervous in coming to a new class, but also the teaching style of a Taiwanese teacher in their public school is going to be a lot different than what the foreign teacher is going to be teaching in our language school. So now you've got different styles and different expectations. And if that student is thinking, oh, this English class is going to be the same as the Taiwanese class, is going to be wrong, and it might be a big shock to them, and it might freak them out, right, when they're in class there. So what you want to do is slowly develop this routine, and so your student will know, okay, when I come to my class, it's going to be this way, and I know it's how it's going to be, so I'm not going to be nervous about it.
Yeah, I taught like in an ABC class, when I was doing that, it was a habit of mine to put like a kind of, like I mentioned earlier, a bit of a structure of the schedule of the class, and also just to either add or take away things throughout, so that the kids know exactly where they are. They feel comfortable. They know what's up next. They have a sense of, oh, this activity's next, so they can prepare mentally and get into it.
So let me give you an example of what a routine is. This is a really simple one of some teachers they do at my school. We'll start off the class with music. So we might have a song, a welcoming song. So it could be like the hello, hello song. And every class, once we get going, we start off with the song. The kids relax. The kids know the song eventually because we're going to do it every day. So over time, of course, not the first couple classes, but over time, they're going to start picking up how to sing the song. So when they come in, they're going to feel like, hey, I know this song. It's a fun song. Ah, okay, I know where I am. And then we'll do things like I said before, we'll do the time, the date, the month, what's the weather like? And we'll do a little activity where the students can respond, and we'll put some flashcards on the board to kind of set off the day. And then maybe if we get into, say, some vocabulary, we might have a way to do introducing words. How do we introduce words? And every time that I'm going to introduce words in that class, I'm going to do it in the same fashion, in the same manner, whether it's flashcards or digital flashcards or whatever that you're using. And then I might do like group practice, individual practice, and then maybe I'll do a game or an activity. And I'll do the same game and activity over a few classes so they learn how to play it. And when they learn how to play it, they're going to feel like comfortable with it, so it's going to be more fun for them. Okay? And then I might say, okay, we're going to do some reading. Well, how do we do a reading section of our class? So I'm going to find a pattern or routine to do that. And then how do I wrap up the class? Do I do some homework checks? Do I tell them what the homework is going to be? Do we line up? Do I have to check books like communication books? Do I have them push in their chairs? All of these kinds of things. Do they answer a question before they leave the class? So all of these things are routine based, and they're little routines within the larger routine of your class. So one thing is to remember, especially with language learners, is that you want to establish a routine over time. And again, everybody's going to feel comfortable and start to enjoy the class. And you'll start to see, when that happens, you'll start to see better language acquisition with your students.
Yeah, and if you focus on your goals, like I was thinking back to this idea of lesson planning and what are the goals, like what are those objectives for a specific lesson? That routine will help you to narrow in on those things, right?
Right.
So your routine can include that. Okay, an objective of mine is for the kids to be able to say these words. And I just do that every class. It keeps you, that fresh in your mind as well.
Yeah, and it'll help you to fill out that lesson plan a lot more easily and a lot more quickly, because a lot of it is going to seem repetitive. And it's okay. It's okay to be repetitive over time. And eventually you'll kind of transition into some new routines, and you'll have to introduce new routines and new activities. So, and that's okay. And then you do that new routine for a while, and then you have another one later. So that's how it all works.
So I think what you're trying to tell us is planning is important.
Something like
it's important
that.
To plan. It's important to get in there and, yeah.
Yeah. But again, when you're new, you don't know. So you just plan as best you can,
Right.
and then see what works.
Right.
And then, I guess those routines that work well, you can start to use them a little bit more in the beginning, right?
Actually, to borrow a term from software development, right? We create a product or we create some feature and then we iterate on it. So it's very similar to that concept where you do this once, then you go back and you look at how effective it was, and then you iterate on that. So your next version might be slightly different, but you have those overall goals and objectives in mind.
Same kind of thing. Yep. So that's it. That's it on routine. Don't feel like being repetitive is bad. Being repetitive and having routine is a good thing. So Bill, we've got our plan and we've got our routines. We're developing our routines, but all of this isn't not really that effective if we don't bring the right personality and attitude to the classroom. Am I correct on this?
Oh, without a doubt. So yeah, for sure. Your attitude, your energy level, all of these things really affect your teaching effectiveness. So there are some things you want to avoid when you're teaching. So having low energy, just some examples, low energy, talking too softly, really boring material or just boring presentation in class, sitting down, what during the class, like sitting down is just can be a real drag on the effectiveness of your class and the energy in the classroom. Being unprepared. So we talk about planning, we talk about lesson plans, we talk about all of this organization in the beginning before you even teach the lesson, and that's definitely a part of it. Being unprepared is going to really affect the outcome of your teaching. Delivering the material that you're teaching, like I said, in a kind of a dull manner. Not projecting your voice and using like a smiling kind of a friendly, using that sort of a friendly way to teach. If you're teaching too seriously and stiff, the kids are going to get bored, right? They're going to lose interest. It's really going to affect the way you teach or the class. And I guess the last point on that, real quick, is if you're not so sensitive, it's important to be sensitive to or aware of what the students need. So at every level, you have different needs, different students at different ages, different English skill levels. So be aware of that when you're teaching.
Yeah, I'll add in, like, sitting down is a big thing to me. The moment that you sit down in a classroom, the whole ambiance of the class changes, because you're being looked at as sort of the general, the leader of the class, and all the students are taking cues from you. And the moment you sit down, number one, students maybe in the back can't really see you, and number two, you're just diminishing your presence, and that affects the culture of the classroom, affects the energy of the classroom.
Right, especially with young kids who are more active. They require a little bit more, kind of like
stimulation from you.
For sure. Yeah, that's a great word. Stimulation that helps encourage the kids to participate and to be active learners. So in the next, I think this is a good place to transition kind of into this next part of being an effective teacher. So some of the qualities you want to strive for or think about when you're teaching is be consistent in your teaching and your style and how you present materials, but also be creative. And the details are important. If you spend all that time planning your lesson and you're just sort of glossing over it in class while you're presenting the lesson or teaching the lesson, and it's not going to be as effective.
Yeah,
so keep that in mind.
And I think students, and even if you have adult students, for example, they can tell when you've sort of mailed it in and didn't do a lot of preparation or you didn't think much about this lesson. You're not too creative. They can tell, right?
Yeah. Having spent more time preparing and really knowing the material allows you to be more creative and kind of diverge a little bit during the class. And it comes over with time, right? As a teacher, the more you teach a lesson, the more you teach kind of a topic or whatever, the more familiar you are, the more you can kind of break away from an activity and do sort of different variations on that, right? So, have a friendly smile. Have a friendly kind of smiling attitude. I think is really, really important.
Smile?
To engage with the students.
Smile, really?
Yes, it's important.
I can't come in with a grumpy face. Yeah.
No, and a hangover. That's not good.
Not good.
Yeah, get a good night's rest. Be fresh and ready in the morning.
I think with having that, being smiling and friendly, of course, with children, right? They're playing off your cues, but even with adults, even if you have to teach, a business English class in the evening or something, 100%, if you come in positive and feeling good, they're going to take that cue as well and maybe be a little bit more motivated, because those workers have been working all day, they're in the office all day, and now they have to do another class. So bring in the optimism. Yeah.
And the kids, and if you're teaching kids in the afternoon, for example, like a lot of teachers in Asia will teach kids in the afternoon after they've been in class in school since early in the morning. So if you're you're tired and you're not teaching with a very kind of energetic feeling in the classroom, it's going to really affect the way the kids respond. So a couple things, a couple of other things about being, having an effective teaching strategy. Think logically, think through the lesson plan. You planned it, you organize it, go through it logically, follow the lesson plan. And again, as you talked about, Rob, use that routine, establish that routine, and try to be consistent in the way you teach that same lesson, each time you do. And keep your eye on your objectives and goals. So that, again, that's going to reinforce what the kids are learning. And then be a strong, clear speaker. Don't mumble, don't talk, project your voice. That's also, I see you smiling, that's, I think some teachers will make that mistake, just talking quietly and not really.
It's hard for some people to be strong speakers, It's really rough when you're not that way and you have a group of children. Oh my gosh. It's really tough.
Train wreck.
It can be.
So, and again, be sensitive to the needs of the students. Obviously, you're going to be teaching students at all different levels. So you need to be aware of, okay, now I'm teaching a kindy class. Now I'm teaching, a junior high class or an adult class. Keep those things in mind.
We talked about that before, like evaluation. Just you're always evaluating your students, their reactions, and yourself, right? You're always evaluating yourself. Is this working? Am I doing the right thing? Have I lost them? Or are we still moving ahead, right?
And iterate. If you need to rethink your plan the next time around and improve on it, and tweak some of it, then that's good. You're working through those kind of issues and those making it more effective. The last part, just to wrap up this section, is have an effective teaching strategy. So that means while you're teaching, you're up, you're active, you're engaging with the students and moving around, being animated. Don't just sit there or stand with your hands folded in front of you. The little kids especially want to be active. So that is really, really important. Just have an active, fun kind of attitude and keep the class moving. So to kind of wrap this section up, really focus on what in your lesson plan and during the execution of your lesson in class, have an effective strategy in mind. Like how do I reach the students? How do I be consistent and creative in these things? Keep these ideas in mind, and we'll outline some of this information in the show notes as well.
And Bill, actually, I have this theory that I've had this for years because I've watched a lot of teachers come and go, and teachers that teach a particular class for a while. I have this theory that the students take on the personality of that teacher. So the students might all come in with their own personality, like from, say, Taiwanese school, and they are who they are. They are who they are at school, and this is how they learn, and this is how they study. But then they're coming into this English environment, and the only person they have there to model is their teacher. And if that teacher has been teaching them maybe for 2 years or 3 years or 4 or even 5 sometimes, you start to see, at least I believe this, you start to see the students take on some of the personality traits of their teacher. So what I mean is, like, sometimes teachers can be a little bit goofy, and you might see the culture of that class become a little bit goofy. Or some teachers are more straight and narrow and serious, and it might be a fun class, but the way that they conduct themselves is a little bit more, straight to the point. And you will see the students behave in the same manner when they're in class. So I've come to believe that a positive, good personality is going to translate into a positive, good class of students that are going to enjoy learning.
So Rob, tell us about so in your classes, how do you keep control? How do you manage your classes? How do you organize that aspect of your teaching?
Right. So we can get into the topic of classroom management. And what exactly does this mean? And does your style of your teaching affect how you manage or how the classroom is managed? And I think that when you say classroom management to many people, it's like, oh, well, you're controlling the class and you're telling you're the dictator, right? You're telling everybody what to do and you're going to keep everybody in line. But I think it goes a lot more beyond that, because classroom management can slowly develop over time where it doesn't even feel like you're managing the class. And what do I mean by that? Okay, well, first of all, you can start off. Now, if you're new to teaching and you're having a new class, think of some rules that you want to establish for your classroom. And you want to lay out these rules to your students every day. Maybe there's a space on a wall in the classroom you can put up some of your class rules. And these could be like, we say thank you, or be polite, raise your hand, things like that. Very simple, classroom behavior that you expect from your students. Right off the bat, that is a bit of classroom management, because you're laying down these expectations to how you want your students to communicate with each other and communicate with you. Now, another aspect of classroom management is you being the leader. And we just talked about, for example, sitting down in class while you're teaching. Well, that doesn't really show that you're a leader of the class. You want to be the person in the class that is setting the tone and that is driving the class forward and achieving your goals and your objectives. So you need to come in with that demeanor and let your students know that you are the one that they can trust to do this. And this includes like having a clear voice, communicating clearly with students, not sitting down, right? Not being kind of bored and uninterested. These are ways that are going to motivate your kids a little bit to pay attention to your students. Now, we can get into some other things like reward systems. Like my school, we have a star system. So with the young learners, if they answer questions or they do something good in the class, they'll get stars. They'll get a star on the whiteboard. And at the end of the day, we put these stars in this little book that they have. And when they accumulate enough stars, they can change it into a gift. And this really motivates the kids, sometimes motivates them to want to answer questions and to participate, to do their homework, things like that. And again, this plays into class management because you are expecting them to act one certain way, to do certain things, and hey, they're going to get something in return, so they're really happy to do it. And it works opposite too. You can take away stars as punishment. So that also sort of keeps your classroom, keeps very clear what your expectations are from the students. And this kind of works more with younger learners. As the students get older, we find they don't really care about stars. But by that time, they're motivated by other things in the classroom anyways. And what I mean by that is that I believe that students come to class, they want to learn. They want to be inspired. They want to be motivated. They want to get something out of the class. They're very curious. Students tend to be very curious. So if you are running a class, you've got your lesson plan, your routines, everything, and the students feel like, hey, I'm getting something out of this. It's really fun. It's educational for me. Then you're managing your class in that way. They're going to be motivated. They're going to pay attention. They're going to want to do work. They're going to want to participate, right? So that is a form of class management as well. It's not about you being the dictator and telling everybody to do, but it's creating this environment where everybody wants to learn and they're really excited about learning.
Yeah, I was just wanted to throw in there, if you in the first class you have, right, when you're first teaching a class, it takes some time to establish that kind of sense of, the classroom management or organization, right? It doesn't happen immediately.
Right, yeah. Yep, for sure.
Yeah, it takes some time, but you'll find the more you can establish that sense of routine and that classroom kind of, the flow of the class, you'll have eager learners, right? You'll have students who are enthusiastic and excited to come to class, as opposed to the kids who are dreading it, right?
Yeah, having to force them, right? Feel like you're forcing them and punishing them to do things, right? That's what you want to avoid.
Yeah. It's going to be fun. It's going to be more fun for you and for the kids.
Right. Yeah. Right? That's your ultimate goal, right? I mean, sometimes you do get a crop of students that are unmotivated. Well, how do you get them motivated? That can be a real challenge.
Absolutely. I taught junior high kids a few years ago, and that was challenging. Man, Junior high, the kids are, they're at that age where they're not really interested in a lot of things other than just hanging out with their friends. And it's really difficult to get the kids motivated and get them excited. But it's even more difficult if you're not organized or you don't have a clear strategy for teaching the class. And that will make your experience much better if you do approach it with that.
Yeah, I think with those kinds of classes, especially junior high here, the students are also going to be watching you very carefully. And like, if this teacher into what they're doing, does this teacher care, right? Do you care about their student learning? And that can really help to motivate them as well. Now, we talked about routine. Having a routine helps with your class management because, again, students know the expectations. They know what's coming. They know what they have to do. So they're going to be excited and eager to do it, hopefully, if your routines are good. And let me talk about a few other things. Maybe, seating arrangements. If you have younger learners, that could matter with your class management. You can be a little sneaky in that way. Well, I don't want this student next to this student because they tend to talk all the time and disrupt the class, so I'm going to separate them. Or maybe some of your quiet students have to move up front and some of your more vocal students go to the back. So seating arrangements, you can always think about can affect the culture of the class. And another thing is, if you have little kids, some physical cues, like one is like a countdown I like to do, like, hey, if everybody's really loud and noisy, I'll be like, hey, 5, 4, 3, 2. And by the time I get to 1, everybody's quieted down because they know that's why I'm counting down. And I've seen teachers like just put their hands on their heads like this, and that means it's time for the class to settle down. Or they'll say, just put their hand in the air and be like, put their hand up and say, hey, that means that it's time to be quiet. And that's a routine as well. And once students learn that from you, then they know it's time to settle down a bit. So these are all, again, I keep using the word expectations. If you can lay down your expectations clearly, the class ends up managing itself. It manages itself by the routines that you're doing all day. And of course, your personality matters as well. And let me add one more thing is scaffolding as well. And scaffolding is an education term, which means that within a class, we can alter our teaching strategies for different levels of students. And this also goes back to monitoring and kind of formatively evaluating your students. If you learn to scaffold, which means like I can help some of the weaker students or maybe challenge some of the more advanced students within the class, you're also, number one, helping the advanced students not be bored. And if they're bored, they might start to be distracted. And then the lower level students, you're giving them support so they're not bored and they're not going to be distracted. And that plays into classroom management as well. So scaffolding or learning to deal with different levels in your classroom is super important as well.
Yeah, Rob, I like that idea of scaffolding. It's something you can use at any level for any class. And also it really ties back to the idea of lesson planning, which are things we've been discussing in this episode. Is lesson planning, understanding the material, all those things give you that ability to be more creative in class and also tackle those special situations, where you have to deal with kind of learners at different ages or English abilities. Then you do that scaffolding. It's really a flexible way to kind of approach different situations in your class.
Yep. It's not an easy thing to learn, but over time, as you get more experience, you start to learn different techniques for that. Okay, we've made it to the end here. Let's do a quick review. We started talking about lesson planning and the importance of forming a lesson plan, knowing your objectives for each class to get started. Then we talked about what routine is and how developing a routine and executing your routine is very important, not only for language acquisition in English classes, but basically all kinds of student learning in any kinds of class. And again, this diminishes effective filter, which could be the anxiousness or surprise or shyness or stress that students might feel within your class. So You'll develop a routine over times, and you'll stick to your routine, and you'll find new routines down the line as you teach longer. And then we talked about the importance of personality and how being an effective teacher, it's a good idea to be friendly, smiling, energetic, standing up, a bit creative, showing your students that you've put effort into the class. The things you want to avoid are low energy, boring talk in class, being unprepared, and maybe approaching your routines or teaching methods in a dull manner. And finally, we talked about classroom management and how classroom management is not only being the general and dictator of the class, but it's all of these things that we talked about today, which is organization, routine, knowing your students, being a leader, having the right personality in the class, and then coming up with some teaching techniques like scaffolding to make sure that your students are interested in the class, motivated to be there, they know the expectations, and they're enjoying the learning process.
All right, we know there are teachers out there who have their own ideas or different thoughts about what we discussed today, and we would love to hear from you. Send us a message or a suggestion, and maybe we can share it on the next show. And don't forget to rate and review us on your favorite podcast app. This helps us with our search rankings so that others can find the show. And be sure to follow us on our Teach Abroad pages on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.
And check out the show notes for other resources and information on what we've discussed today.
Thanks again to EITESLjobs.com for their support. EITESLjobs.com, a source for finding teachers or finding your next teaching job abroad.
And we'll see you in the next episode. Take care, everybody. Happy teaching.
Bye-bye.